So with all that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give kind of a really quick introduction to who I am, kind of why we're having this conversation today, and then in doing so, I'm going to set the stage a little bit of how this topic came to be. And so, the goal here today is to talk a little bit about like the proven member recognition award model, since many of you are membership-based associations. Now, keeping in mind that everything that we're going to kind of dive into and talk about is hyper relevant to scholarship programs, grants, fellowships, board nominations, conference abstract collection. The beauty of what we do here at Reviewr is all of these different use cases and programs, from an association to a nonprofit to a foundation, are actually very identical, right? Like the content you're collecting within a scholarship versus an award will be different, and how you go through the review process will be different. But there's still three kind of core consistencies. You have to collect applications, you got to do something with them, and then you've got to go through some type of built-in review and scoring process. So my goal here today is, yes, we'll jump into Reviewr here just a little bit to help kind of visualize some of the concepts. But the goal is not to kind of dive deep into the platform, kind of showcase it. It's more so a way for me to hopefully provide best practices and insights that you can take and apply to your programs, literally overnight. And so to kind of set the stage a little bit, my name is Kyle. I'm the CEO here at Reviewr. I've been doing this since way back in 2012. And so, kind of what our story looks like is we built the platform from very real firsthand experience. We sat in the same shoes as many of you guys. We named it Reviewr because that was life that we lived. So we actually are part of the volunteer review committees for a wide variety of these types of programs. So going way back in time, these programs are done through physical paper. So you'd have binders physically mailed to your doorstep. You'd handwrite notes and feedback and scores. You'd ship it back. You'd meet in person on the weekends. And it was very manual. Now, to be clear, as a volunteer, it wasn't that bad of a process, although nobody loved having physical paper binders sent to them. At least things were centralized. One of the bigger challenges, and keeping in mind, I understand the operational headaches that went into that, right? Like the time and energy that people like yourselves put into compiling it to make it not terrible for us is kudos to you. The challenges that we started to run into were a few years later when organizations would go online. And that's actually very much kind of why we're having this conversation today. Because when you go online, what that typically meant is, using built-in web forms, downloading of documents, a lot of emails, a ton of spreadsheets. And it started to create very disconnected processes. So we actually spent way more time as volunteers. We saw a lot of negative ramifications and impacts to the program. And that's kind of where I want to start today. So over the last month or so, I've had two kind of very common reoccurring conversations. One most recently with a scholarship foundation who was collecting their applications via email, right? So they'd have people physically send them an email with a bunch of attachments. And those attachments would be, file uploads, it could be resumes, it could be references, you name it. In that specific use case, this is a real story. That organization went through an entire review, scoring, selection process. They cut scholarship checks, and then like 6 months later, they're hearing from applicants saying like, "Hey, like, where's the update? Did I receive funding? Like, where are we at?" And they were kind of left scrambling, and they're looking at the data and saying, "Well, no, we never even reviewed you." And what ended up happening is they found all of those applications sitting in a spam filter somewhere. And so, obviously, as a volunteer and as a nonprofit, like, it's very heartbreaking. We physically can't have that happen, but it's also presenting a significant risk to the organization from a compliance perspective. So that's kind of one very extreme example. The more common example that keeps popping up over and over again, and this is also why we built Reviewr in the first place, is you had this kind of influx of organizations. Many of you probably are in this boat, who said, look, we have to start to create some type of structure and systems around these types of programs. Like, there are so many moving parts. So we need to leverage technology and we need to leverage tools. So what ended up happening is we started to look at, okay, well, how do we use web forms, our website? How do we use our AMS, our database, spreadsheets, downloading of documents? And then again, that was life that we lived. And so, yes, while we went online, none of these tools are really dedicated for the task at hand. And bits and pieces started to break down. And without having like a comprehensive system in place, you started to see disconnected, lost information. You started to see biases in the selection process. So committee members would sit down, they go through the review, they pick their friends, they pick their family members, they pick their favorite members. There's no structure to the review and scoring process. So you had people very subjectively scoring. There was no consistency. You had some evaluators that just on average scored higher or lower than others, and that was negatively impacting the applicants that got like the short stick of the draw. Things like that started to pop up over and over again. And so that's actually why we decided to have today's webinar, because one of here at Reviewr, one of our primary focuses here this last quarter, I guess Q1 of 25, is systems, right? Everybody in life has a lot of activities on a daily basis. And when you don't have systems in place, you start to focus on things for a while and then you start to lose focus on them over time. You forget about them, you kind of reallocate priorities elsewhere. But the idea behind systems, or I guess if you think through your programs, you have to go from point A to point Z, point A being like the launch of your program and the collection of applications. And point Z can be, the selection process. It could be like the post-selection marketing and celebrating of your members. And that's kind of where we shift all of our focus to. But kind of where the magic happens and where the success of these programs lies is really between points B and Y, right? And so here at Reviewr internally, that we focus very, very heavily on having systems in place, SOPs, standard operating procedures, for kind of all the guiding principles to everything that we do. And it allows you guys or anybody to kind of jump in, look at your programs, audit them, and really just kind of, quite frankly, follow along a series of checklists and kind of cross them off as you go, knowing that the effort and legwork was put in to kind of create those systems, that at the end of the day, when the programs wrap up, you can kind of go back to your checklist. You're going to see check boxes next to literally everything. And you know for exact certainty that your program ran in great success because you followed a proven checklist. And so as we have these conversations, one of the common trends was, okay, well, that's great in theory. One of the great quotes I like is ideas are easy, but execution is everything. So the question came into play is like, okay, well, what are these checklists? Like, what is kind of the proven model that we have to be thinking through as we launch these programs? Again, awards, grants, scholarships, any of these application-based collection review programs have almost an identical series of checklists and systems in place. So I want to walk through, some examples of what these would be. I also want to kind of visualize that with real clients who are using Reviewr, just so you can kind of get a better sense of like how do you take those concepts and put them into real practice. So with all that said, I kind of just kind of spieled out a lot of stuff that would have been on a slide eventually. But again, going back in time, we think through like, okay, if I want to launch an award program, if I want to launch a scholarship program as part of my foundation, like what does the tech stack look like, or what are the different tools that we are probably utilizing? And as you can see here, like there's a long list of three what I call experiences: the applicant submission experience, the operation experience, and then the review and selection experience. And the challenge is most organizations, from some of the data that we have, are using roughly 8 to 9 different tools to run kind of comprehensively their entire program. And that's quite problematic because, again, these aren't the same tools by the same company. So if you use Google Forms to collect applications, or maybe you're going to go super deep and use your AMS, or you're going to use Qualtrics or Airtable, you might have elevated the applicant experience, which is great. That's one major goal that we have. But then you're kind of left on the back end trying to download and export those submissions, put them into Google Drive, put them back into your AMS. Maybe you're using SharePoint or Salesforce to create operational efficiencies. And then from there, we have to have our teams come in to help go through a review and selection process. So a lot of times that means we're moving that data to tools like Dropbox, or it could be Google Drive. And then oftentimes you're going to send off this giant spreadsheet with a bunch of information. And you're going to say, hey, review team, go read this information, go fill out the spreadsheet. Ideally, they're not doing their own tabulations, because we definitely don't want humans touching formulas, because if one row or one column is off, all the results are skewed. And then they send it back to you. Now we're dealing with email, and then you're gonna have to take all the results from all the other evaluators and merge them together. So I don't know if you guys want to throw a quick little emoji or a thumbs up in the chat if that kind of resonates a little bit with kind of what your current lives look like. But so the idea here is, okay, great. We know that we need these types of tools, but then how do we convert them into like dedicated platforms? So obviously that's where Reviewr comes in. I'm going to share this back out afterwards. I don't want to get too deep into like you guys reading through a giant list of pain points. Just for fun though, I love using tools like ChatGPT. I think like most of us do. I copy and pasted, hey, I'm at an association and I run an award program. And this is like what my common process looks like, just basically what I just told you. And I said, can you visualize like what this feels like in the day of the life? And this is actually what it kicked out. So this is identical, downloaded the image this morning and plopped it on here. So hopefully you guys don't feel too much of this guy's pain, but I think it kind of does resonate because there are so many moving parts and each part works interconnected with one another. So some of the impact, I've already talked a little bit about this, right? You're going to have a lack of engagement from your membership and from your applicants. we're going to get deeper into like what does a very ideal nomination structure look like if you are running an award program, because now you're dealing with multiple parties. You've got nominators, you've got nominees. Obviously, you're collecting a whole bunch of information. Some of it could be very personal, right? So security and compliance because of the thing. Ideally, there's transparency and there's communication going on. So how do you centralize some of that? So I mean, there's a long list of potential negative impacts, which may be why you guys are here today. So that's again why we built Reviewr, obviously to change the game. So if you think through like that little spider web of all these different tools and processes in place, how does Reviewr solve that? Well, we kind of funnel it into one centralized hub. So it's a dedicated experience that really does have all the mechanisms in place already from proven decades of experience to kind of run operationally from start to finish your entire programs. So I just wanted to run through that super quick to kind of set the stage a little bit. What I really want to do now, though, is I want to help you guys visualize, like if I was an association, I wanted to launch a member recognition award tomorrow, like how would I personally do it from some of our experience? And again, a lot of these concepts are going to apply 100% directly to scholarships, grants, fellowships, conference call for abstracts, you name it. So I want to start with the applicant experience. So the name of the game here is we absolutely have to lower the barrier for them. One of the biggest things I hear from our association partners is, well, over the years, we haven't really grown the program. We have less and less members who are applying. Maybe it's like a 4% of our membership actually participates. And we start to kind of dive deep into the weeds and like, okay, like why is that happening? So number one, is growth a concern, or are you looking for higher quality content, or is it a combination of both? And we start to unpack, well, we're telling them to go to our website and download a fillable PDF. So right away, you're going to lose a large percentage of audience members because they don't want to take the extra steps to do it. Others are saying, well, we have this really overly complex, 35 question or 35 page application form, and nobody actually follows through with it. So the name of the game here is we absolutely have to lower the barrier. We want members to want to partake in it and give them no excuse to back out. So really, how do you do that? One of the emerging trends that we've seen at Reviewr is actually to take your award program and break it into two parallel workflows. So you do an open call for nominations. Now, this isn't for everybody. I know a lot of us have like an award program where we want to surprise the nominees. We don't want them to even be aware of it, right? But at the end of the day, they already are. So a lot of times nominators are already talking with the nominees or getting information from them. They're working together. So if we think that's already happening behind the scenes, then let's just kind of go with the flow and leverage it. So the ideal structure here is to break your submission workflow specifically into two parallel components. Number one is an open call for nominations, and it's quite simple. Who are you? Who are you nominating and why? That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. The number one goal there is to drive marketing efforts and increase the number of participants who are interacting with it, right? There's nobody who doesn't have time to fill out those three questions. Now, from there, however, it's absolutely critical that you get the data that you need to go through a formal review and selection process. Again, this will be different depending on your organization, the type of content you're collecting, and the structure of your awards. But you're going to have to get some type of like personal storytelling or metrics from your nominees in order for you to compare them to their peers and go through a selection process. So in that example I just gave, we actually will tell the nominees that, hey, you were nominated, click here to accept your nomination. And then we ask them to fill out all the very formal details about themselves. So reasons why that works really, really well is you're putting the bulk of the effort on the nominee. So if they want to be recognized and receive the award, they're going to put forth the time. The content is going to be way higher quality because it's coming directly from the source. It's also going to be a lot more accurate information as well, because who knows more about themselves than the nominees. We work a lot with alumni associations, and one of the struggles that they often have is their databases are very outdated. People go to school, they graduate, they leave, they get new jobs, they move, they get married. And so for them, it's like, how do we enrich our databases with up-to-date current records of our nominees? And that's how you do so. You just have it come directly from the source. I'm going to visualize this. This is more so for those of you who collect references with your award programs, but also if you're a scholarship provider, this is super critical. Is how do you collect references? So again, generally speaking, those are private processes. Most references don't want the submitter to see it, so they end up sending it to you via email. So now you're left figuring out, okay, I got this email full of references. I got to figure out who it's from, who it's for, etc. And you have to find a way to merge them. So why not maybe instead consider looping it together where you actually notify the references automatically saying, hey, Kyle's request that you submit a reference on his behalf, click here to do so, and they just upload it directly to the system. We'll kind of get more to best practices, but one of the things here is that maybe don't collect reference letters. It's a huge barrier for people. They don't have the time to write a full-blown letter. A lot of times they're going to have lower quality. It's a better reflection of the writing ability of the reference and who it's for. They may be repurposing old references. So maybe instead push them towards a reference template. Like, what are the three things you want references to talk about? They just come into the system, they answer those three things, and they get on with their life. Data is going to be higher quality. And then when you go to review your candidates, you're going to be comparing apples to apples because every applicant has the same data associated with them. So kind of two really quick examples to kind of walk you through this. So number one is a 30 under 30 program. I think in general, this is not part of today's conversation, but this is a very, very common style award program being hosted by association. So as we know, the long-term sustainability of an association is largely dependent on the demographics of your membership. And so many of us are really struggling with getting a younger, newer, fresh member to join. And then once they join, keep them retained for the next 20 to 30 years. So the best way to do that is to target specifically that demographic. And so, doing things like 30 under 30s or young professionals, maybe even partnering with, local colleges and universities before they even have a chance to become a member is a great type of campaign to run. So in this example, the National Association of Realtors does just that, right? They run a 30 under 30, recognizing, the 30 greatest up and coming realtors across the country. So they use their website, and then from there, applicants come into Reviewr. This is a core component that starts the system. So no matter what tools you use, if you use Reviewr or not, I think it's absolutely critical that you think through your programs as profile centric. We are collecting a lot of data, and we always have to talk about data collection, forms, file uploads, communication, scores. At the end of the day, though, these are people, and we have to treat them as such. And so the goal here is that the applicants kind of just quickly register, they create the profile, but long term, that profile holds onto all of their activity. So who they are, their submission forms, their file uploads, communication, results and scoring, any ongoing data collection you want to collect from them. Maybe they're selected to your awards and you want them to come back and submit like a personal bio or a headshot or something like that. The idea here is if you think from end to end, you have to have all the data centralized in one spot. And the only way to do that is to create a concept called profiles. Now, again, whether or not you use Reviewr or not, I think this is kind of a trend that you have to start to push people towards. For those of you who have AMSs, which is most associations, we're not here to replace your AMS. We actually love working alongside them. We have incredible relationships with the vast majority of them. Impexium, the many products under the community brands, MemberClicks, Fontiva, you name it. And so a lot of our clients will do a single sign-on at this point, right? So they just log in with their existing membership credentials and then boom, they're on their way. So this is an example of what I just talked about, where you break the awards into a dual nominator-nominee workflow. So nominator comes in, they tell us who they are, they tell us basically who they're going to be nominating, and then kind of a brief abstract on like why that person is a deserving nominee. And then at that point in time, they're completely done. So the nominator spends literally 5 minutes, they're on their way. This inherently alone really dramatically increases the top of the funnel pipeline of participants for you guys. Now, in this example, since we're talking about a 30 under 30, I would assume we want to collect information about the nominee, right? So if you're under the age of 30, I want to know like some of your credentials. I want to know more about like your personal achievements in your resume. So again, these are things we want to come directly from them. Historically speaking, if you just did an open call for nominations, you guys know for a fact that the nominator is already working with the nominee. So let's just kind of cut through the red tape and let's just go with the flow on that one. So email goes out and it says, hey, Ryan, you've been nominated for this year's 30 under 30. Click here to accept your nomination. They then join the nomination that was already started for them. Now you can lock it down. You don't have to show them what was submitted, but they're basically entering like the nominee portal at this time. For those of you that have eligibility, so many of the programs that we work with, they have a ton of different kind of eligibility criteria. So in this example, if you're over the age of 30, you're not eligible. So it's very small systems like this that go a long ways. So you don't want to waste somebody's time applying for an opportunity that they just quite frankly can't receive. Operationally speaking, you guys don't have the bandwidth to vet through a bunch of applications just because they're not qualified. So bake in the qualifications into the system, right? So if they're not under the age of 30, then don't allow them to proceed on. Again, it seems like very small things, but this is really what drives member engagement. So here's where we can kind of see that Ryan comes in, and this is all the data again that you know for a fact the nominator wouldn't have, right? Like the nominator is not going to have the real estate ID number. They have no idea what certifications this person received. These are sales numbers, right? Because these are basically celebrating the real estate agent's success levels. So again, get it directly from the source. One other kind of quick example, this is the other traditional model where maybe you have just like a centralized application. There is no nomination process. It's a self-application. However, maybe you are collecting a bunch of deliverables. Maybe you've got multiple awards, a lot of different categories. So things really don't change. So applicants come in, they create their profile, they tell us who they are, and then it drops them into the submission process. What makes this super cool is this is a submission that's actually by a person on behalf of a firm who is able to submit multiple times for multiple different categories. So the concept here is called personalized experiences. We, again, have to lower the barrier. We want applicants to save, they can log out, they can come back later. But the goal there is that we don't want them interacting with tools. We want tools to interact with them. So in this example, I've got Ted Mosby, who is applying for a project called the Renaissance of the Arcadian, and they are picking a very particular category from this dropdown. So if you've got like 5 or 6 different award types or categories, the idea here is that they'll just select which one they're applying for, and then the entire system updates in real time. Because we know that you chose the large architecture category. Now we're going to ask you for very specific questions relevant to the category that you chose. We're also going to save you a bunch of time on the back end by categorizing applicants for you. So this applicant kind of comes in, answers a series of questions. I'm not going to get too deep into this. File uploads, we're going to come back to this in a little bit. Short answers, essay prompts, you name it. So I'm going to pause there for one last little tidbit. This is more so targeted for those of you on the call that do reference collection, but if you're a scholarship provider or part of a foundation, this is going to resonate. So super, super quick. In this example, the applicants just basically tell us who the references are. And then what happens is it triggers an email saying, hey, so-and-so, you've been asked to submit a reference on behalf of Kyle. Click here to do so. Once they click the link, they're actually brought into a dedicated reference portal. So the idea here is that it's very, very simple for them. I mentioned beforehand that maybe they ditched letters of reference. Instead, they're going to fill like a template or a score sheet. So the reference just simply answers a series of questions and then boom, they're done. Now in real time, this will actually attach itself directly back to the applicant's profile. That brings up the next point, which are your operational systems. So one of the main things I want to spend time talking about here today, and I love doing Q&As where you guys can actually talk about whatever you want. Maybe you guys can ask questions to one another. It's not very common. We get 20 to 30 different kind of association professionals in a room together because nobody knows more about the challenges that impact the space than you guys. With that said, I do want to spend some time talking through like a fair, non-biased, compliant review process. So we're going to run super quick through operational systems. I mentioned beforehand that a lot of times, as an association professional, we look at our programs and we kind of think very linear, right? From point A to point Z, I open my applications and then I celebrate my recipients. But the magic happens again between points B and Y. And so from an operation perspective, we talk about systems. You have to have a centralized, standardized hub that does everything such as monitoring progress, viewing your content. You have to be able to communicate. Humans will always procrastinate. That's both your applicants as well as your review teams. So how do you have clear visibility on like who's done, who's not done? How do you kind of automatically nudge them along by sending them reminder messages? If you want to redact data, so hiding any PII or sensitive information from certain people, how do you do so? One of the more challenging concepts here is once applications come in, how do you actually decide, who's going to be reviewing them? Do you want them to review everybody? Are you going to do random reviews? Do you have committee members? So how do you actually start to pair people up? And that list goes on and on. And then obviously from like a reporting perspective, reports are a sensitive topic because everybody wants to run reports, everybody wants to track and measure impact. But anytime that your processes are disconnected, that means that your data lives in multiple places. Reporting pretty much becomes impossible. So that's one of the major benefits of centralizing things into one system is that now you can basically run as many reports as you want because it all kind of lives together. So kind of visually, what does that look like? So all of our clients here at Reviewr, again, this is not meant to be a Reviewr demo here, but the goal is that you have to have some type of way to visualize processes. So dates and deadlines, where you're at within the grand scheme of things, are people done, not done, send them reminders, things like that. I use the term profile quite a bit. I want you guys to be able to visualize what that would look like. Again, this is where maybe if you're using tools like Jotform to collect applications, like you can view data, but then you have to then convert it to an Excel spreadsheet. Whatever tools that you use, you basically have to be able to do what I'm about to show you. So I can sort and filter by my many different opportunities. So it could be my different award categories, it could be the different programs that are powered by Reviewr, but the goal is I can simply click into or click on one of the submissions. And then I went old school here. I took like that concept of a binder, like a very physical paper binder mailed to us, and we just virtualize it. So this is Ted again. This is Ted's entry for the Renaissance of Arcadian. And you can see in the center of my page is all of the content we collected from Ted. So who Ted is, there's a bunch of file uploads, there's some short answers, there's some essays. There's going to be at some point in here a reference that was submitted. And we basically took all of that content and centralized it for you. From there, you can send direct one-to-one communication to your applicant. So I can actually send Ted a direct one-to-one message. I can leave notes to Ted. I can have Ted come back and update his profile, add more deliverables, whatever you want to do from them. It's also very common that maybe you want to leave internal notes, right? So you might want to leave a note about TED that you share with your team. Maybe you want to collaborate with some of your other evaluators or some of your other team members. However, you don't want TED to see that content. That's great. You just log the notes and it stays private amongst yourself. So files are a very tricky thing nowadays. Every single program powered by Reviewr has some type of file upload. It could be a simple one-page PDF, or you might have video files, photos, resumes, PDFs, spreadsheets, you name it. The reason why files are challenging is that we live in a time where there's an infinite number of file types. So I'm a Mac user, so I have Pages, I've got Doc documents, I've got Google Drive files. If you take a video on your iPhone, it's going to come in 5 different file formats, and they're going to be gigantic. And the challenge that that poses is at some point you might want your team to actually look at those deliverables. So how do we create consistency where we don't even care if you're using a tablet on an airplane or if you're sitting behind your computer, working when your kids go to bed? How do we make sure that you can actually physically access those documents? And B, how do we avoid having to download them, go use other tools, and then come back? So in Reviewr, at least, the goal here is that we'll show you a list of every file that was uploaded. And then if you press the view button next to it, it'll actually embed the file directly in the system. So again, PDFs, PowerPoints, Word documents, photos, videos, 130 different file types are going to do this. But the idea is that in one centralized place, you can toggle back and forth between file uploads, the attachments, the submissions, the references, whatever it might be. And that's kind of the last note here on operational systems is references. So for those of you who do this, again, it might be a smaller demographic for awards. Nearly 100% of scholarships do this. Any references that you collect actually show up in this list. So again, we've got Frederick and we have Louise. Both of them submitted references on behalf of Ryan. The beauty of this is that Ryan never touched them. He never saw them. Once they get submitted, you just simply press view and then it embeds the reference directly in front of me. This is also using that template example I talked about where, yes, they still uploaded a letter, but they basically asked Frederick to answer 3 questions. Talk about Ryan's professional achievements, his innovation, and community involvement. So again, completely lowering the barrier for references, also creating a tremendous consistency in your data. Okay, so I know a hot topic for many, many of you is as applications come in, at least in this model, we've lowered the barrier. We've had a tremendous experience for our members. It's a well-oiled machine. You guys, operationally speaking, have dashboards. You've got reports. You can communicate. You can do everything that you want to do. However, we have to kind of look at the elephant in the room, which is we have all these submissions that we now need to review. How on earth are we going to do that? And to kind of dumb it down, there's 2 things we have to look at. Number one is how do we decide who's going to be reviewing which applications? And number two is when they actually go to review the applications, how are they reviewing it? So some of the metrics that we have at Reviewr, and this is kind of a striking number, is on average, most reviewers are volunteers, right? Or they're staff members that have other daily obligations. Like nobody has a full-time staff judging these submissions, right? And so on average, they can't score more than 15 to 20 applications a piece. Their energy levels drop off pretty dramatically. So if you're looking at maybe 10 minutes or so per submission, it's a couple hours of time, right, that they're going to be putting forth. Anything more than that, then they can't give the same energy that they gave to number one as they're giving to number 31. And so that's very unfair to your applicants. The quality of the reviews will start to diminish pretty dramatically. So then you might be asking, okay, great. So we have all these submissions and I have these judges. How do I decide and choose who's going to be reviewing who? So you can do that a lot of different ways. I think from an award program perspective, committees are a very common approach as well as multiple phases of review. So for simple math, if you had like 100 submissions, you might have a 5 to 10 different committees who are all reviewing a subset of submissions. Maybe you want to have, a committee per award program or per category with a dedicated team in charge of judging it. Maybe you layer on a multi-phase review where 100 applications come in and you quickly vet through them. In that model, you can absolutely score more than 20 people because you're not filling out full-blown scorecards. It's more of like a thumbs up, thumbs down. Like, how do we kind of get to like the top 50, right? And then advance the top 50 to phase two, which has a separate team of people. They're judging with scorecards, whatever it might be, and then advance them on to phase three, phase four, et cetera. So we call those buckets. I'm going to show this to you in a little bit, but there's many ways of doing that. One of my personal preferences is using randomization. So I could basically say, and you can layer this, right? So you could still have committees by award category or by program type, but then within there, you could say, well, I want each of my reviewers to score 15 people. That's it, no more, no less. Or I could say, I want them to score maybe between 10 to 20, but I want every applicant scored exactly 3 times. No more, no less, right? So that's kind of my preferred model. The second piece of that conversation, again, I want to make sure we give us a ton of time for Q&A, is how do you conduct reviews and selections? Now, this is the most customizable aspect to your programs. Generally speaking, like I understand there's deliberations that go on. Like your teams are going to sit down, they're going to talk about the candidates, they're going to talk about the results, and that may impact the final selections. That's totally fine. We totally expect it. The idea, however, is to have some type of data-driven decision-making process to help spur those discussions. So at its most rudimentary level, like there should be some type of scorecard that's used. It helps you kind of prioritize and get a high-level ranking of candidates. Number two is it creates some type of consistency for your team. Each one of them, as they're reviewing submissions, has like a guiding principle of what to look for. That way, they're all kind of looking at them through the same lens. Scorecards don't need to be overly complex. Generally speaking, scorecards have to align with your mission and your vision. I would also align them with your submission form. So if in your application form, you've got some metrics, you've got some essays, you've got a resume, you've got a reference, you then have like a scorecard question that pairs up individually with each one of them. Kind of a pro tip or a best practice, generally speaking, don't ask your review team to assign point value. So, don't say on a scale from 1 to 10 or from 1 to 20. What ends up happening is they get super bogged down in the numbers. Number one is it takes them longer to score. Number two is they start to like question like what's the difference between a 16 and a 17. And while it seems like a small thing, when you start to run averages, it absolutely moves the needle. So instead, try to elicit an emotional response from them. So from like good to great or from below average to above average. Now, behind the scenes, we still leverage point values and scorecards, but the emotional response makes it way faster for them to score. It's generally going to be a more accurate type of score for them. They're giving their gut feelings, and they can kind of move through the process much more efficiently. So what does that look like? I mentioned beforehand buckets. So at least at Reviewr, that's how we handle it. You will basically get these buckets. And so going back to the example we had beforehand, this is structured on a per category basis. So this award program has 4 different categories from conceptual to small to medium to large. Again, you can layer these. You could have a conceptual category phase one, phase two, phase three, millions of ways to configure this. The goal, however, is to leverage automation. So if you remember beforehand, Ted, our applicant here, had applied to the large architecture category. So by default, as soon as he or she presses submit, we're going to drop their application into that bucket. Now, it doesn't have to live there. You guys have full control to change things, move things. You can have people in as many buckets as you want. But we basically are making an assumption that we have a category called large architecture and it's full of a bunch of submissions. The next step is to assign that bucket to a team. So whenever Simon, Paula, and Mark come into Reviewr, they're physically only able to see large architecture. Whenever Garrett, Steve, and Paul come into Reviewr, they only see conceptual. So again, we basically took your entire applicant pool, put them into categories, and then now we're pairing up categories with dedicated teams of evaluators. Where this gets a bit more exciting is if you open these buckets up, it actually shows you what's going on. So it shows you both a list of your applicants as well as the potential reviewers. So maybe you want to say, you know what, I don't really care how many people are scored. All I care about is I want every applicant to get reviewed exactly 5 times. Or you might want to say, I want everybody to review maybe no more than 20. you can actually take that and type those numbers in. So I'll say, hey, give every submission to 6 judges, or score them 4 times. And then the system will take your applicants and then equally and randomly assign them out for you. And it'll actually show you how the pairings went on. So if I edit Mark here, basically it says Mark is assigned to Gabrielle, Leslie, Richard, and Sheldon. At any time, you can check or uncheck their names, and then reassign them back out. So you went from extreme automation of basically saying score everybody to very manual one-to-one assignments. Again, if there's any chance you're collecting data that may have a negative impact on the reviewer, so for example, like if you think that they're going to read something and then have them negatively score them, demographic details, PI, whatever it might be, redact that data. And then what happens is the review team comes into the system and they get a list of all of the applicants that they're in charge of scoring. From there, we have to, again, lower the barrier. They're volunteers. Again, if they're looking at 15 to 20 people, we want them to get in and get out. So they get a split screen. Half of the page is the applicant profile, the other half is your scorecard. So again, the goal here is that they can kind of side by side, compare the profile. They can answer a series of scorecard questions. They can jump up top. They can look at the file uploads. Those again get embedded within the system, so they can kind of side by side look at files, answer questions, answer scores, leave comments, leave notes, get on with their life. If your scorecards are mathematic based, as I mentioned beforehand, again, we try to push harder for that. You will then get this leaderboard. And that leaderboard basically kicks out a list of every single applicant. It tells you exactly who scored them, or maybe they haven't even scored them. They could be completely in progress or not even started yet. So you want to send them reminder messages. It then gives you both totals as well as averages. So for many of our clients, they look at this and this is the end all be all. These are the final selections. Others will say, you know what, this is really good data. Let's now deliberate. And they actually will pull this up. They may pre-share this data amongst their staff to come prepared, and they talk about the results. And, just because Richard is the third highest ranked applicant, there may be a really compelling case that he or she moves up to number one. So we at Reviewr don't make decisions for you. We just give you the data to make your own decisions. Okay, one last quick small thing, and that is going to be public voting. So it's turning into a pretty common trend to take your applicants and then allow your own members to do a vote. Now, I want to preface that by saying that that shouldn't be like the main voting structure. I actually wouldn't even include it as like a weighted scoring. I would actually do like a fan favorite or a member's choice. So I love this model because it's a way for you guys to engage your broader membership, kind of tie them and involve them into the process. However, don't give them too much ownership or equity in the final results. So I love member choice awards. The idea here, however, though, is you can pick and choose from your collected submissions who you want to appear, and then your team or the public can kind of go there and start to score them. If you don't want to go this route, I think one of my favorite models is instead doing this as a showcase page. So once the results are in and you've actually gone through the judging process, maybe you just put the finalists on here or the people who received awards. And it's a way for your membership to kind of go here. They can click into their name and then they can view, some type of bio about them. So you can kind of pick and choose which data shows up here. It doesn't have to be your full-blown application. But if this was a showcase page, I could say, hey, cool, Ryan's one of my finalists or Ryan's a recipient. I can look at the images, I can look at the files, I can read more about Ryan. If you are going to do voting, it does allow them to cast a vote as well. So that's kind of a last minute little bonus that we tossed in here today. Again, worst case, I have mixed feelings on public voting. I like member choice, but I absolutely love doing public showcasing of the finalists or the recipients, right? So many of us have on our websites a list of like prior award recipients. It's just a super long list of names and years. I think this is a much more engaging way of doing it. So with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, take a sip of water, and whatever questions that you have for me or for one another, feel free to toss them in the chat. It could be about Reviewr, it could be about the topics today. If there's other challenges that are impacting you guys as an association or as an industry, my gut tells me you're not alone. So it's a really good chance for us to kind of brainstorm and loop in other professionals and experts. Yeah, so a question came in about like a video game award program where each applicant submits kind of a code about the for themselves, and then you share each one individually with one judge. Yeah, that definitely sounds like it potentially could be a bit challenging. I think if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to unpack that if you don't mind one-on-one, just because there seems like some nuances and complexity there. Not sure I fully wrap my head around that. One of the cool features we do have at Reviewr is a one-to-one automatic pairing. So basically, the applicants, when they create their profiles and they create their submission, they'll put in their code, and then you can basically share it one-to-one, right, with each one of your judges. There's also a way that they could, if you wanted them scored multiple times and you wanted them to generate multiple codes. However, you don't want judges to get more than one code. You could have them submit, say, for example, three in the form, and then have it shared out to three separate judges. But then in the system, we could basically say, show judge one this code, show judge two this code, show judge three this code. So I know that's a really high level comment. Would love to unpack that a bit more. I always like to say that over a decade of experience, I think I've seen everything, and we have probably solutions to most of it, but I'm sure at some point something might pop up that will surprise me. Yeah, Kay, that's a great question. I think I would love to pair you up with a member from our team to maybe unpack that a bit more. Because what you're talking about is something I've heard beforehand. And a lot of times those tiers may be automatically assigned to a candidate based off of metrics or achievements or whatever it might be. So um, first and foremost, like there should be logic built into your submission processes and workflows that helps figure out like what tier they belong to and then label them as such. Once that's been done completely automatically, and now we know exactly which applicants fall into what tier, then the question comes into play of like, well, how do you want the different tiers evaluated? Because generally speaking, like you can't really compare one tier to another. And so that's where maybe using like the bucketing to have like a dedicated committee on a tier to tier basis would be extremely valuable. That way, you're not overlapping the scores at all, and you're not really comparing them to one another. So those are just off of reading one quick paragraph, a couple ideas that I have. You also can consider too, like you can have multiple scorecards per tier. So again, if you think about it from like a group or a bucket perspective, tier one, two, three, and four, like they don't have to use the same rubric. Like you can have four completely separate rubrics that align with that tier itself. That way there's like a guiding principle for the judges to fill out. The question came out on essay submissions. Is there a limit or can you set a limit to the length? Yeah. So that's up to you. Generally speaking, like a lot of our clients will set character count limitations. Obviously within a platform like Reviewr, it should show them in real time, like how many characters are remaining. That way they have visibility on it. But yes, that's quite common. Some organizations will have them upload their essays as a file upload, where generally that becomes problematic is now your review team has to download those documents. However, within Reviewr, you also can embed the files in the system. So if you went that route, you can still do the side-by-side judging where they can view the files and the scorecards together. But yeah, I personally prefer to have them just input the data directly into it. We do a significant number of essays. We've also started to see a slight trend towards video essays. It's a super, super personal and engaging way of doing it. Just keeping in mind that if you go to a video essay model, there's a chance that you're going to have lower volume because it is a higher barrier generally to submit videos. Um, in the future, I'm not going to give any timelines. Like in the coming months, we're also launching like an AI detection tool. It's actually far overdue. We've been working on it for a long time, just had to prioritize a couple other things. But it'll help you also identify like of your applicants who are writing those essays, like to what extent are they leveraging tools like ChatGPT to help it write it for them. So, you know for a fact that they're using AI to help with their essays. That's okay. It's going to be a thing moving forward. What we don't want to see happening is them copying and pasting directly from ChatGPT into your application form. So we're calling it Sidekick. It'll do two things. It'll basically quickly check, and it's like a credit score, so it'll check multiple sources to figure out like how confident we are that they used AI, and then to what extent, like 100% copy and paste or like 10%, which basically means that they put a prompt in, help them build a framework, and then from there they wrote their own essay, which is what we hopefully will be seeing more of. It also will do a plagiarism check as well. Yeah, a question came in around can membership status be verified through your AMS as the first step in the nomination process? So that way if they don't meet the criteria, they don't move on. High level, yes, it largely depends on who your AMS is and what data is made available through the single sign-on. So, a very standard SAML-based single sign-on will be able to authenticate the user. And then at least do a membership lookup, right? So like if they're not a member, we would know it. And then you can get kind of creative on what you want to do with those people, right? Do you want them to still be able to apply, but then send it to your team for like a membership opportunity? Give them a message and have them go to your membership department. So it could be a good conversion tool as well. But yes, generally speaking, if in the single sign-on with your AMS, we have access to that data, we can absolutely do that verification for you. For those of you who are still around, I really do appreciate not just your attendance, but also your participation. A lot of times these topics are brought to us, right? So if there's industry challenges or trends or things that you're facing, let us know. We'll find resources. It may not be us. That's totally fine. We'll make sure, with our partnerships with so many AMSs, with association management companies, we have a pretty deep Rolodex of contacts that will make sure we bring on the right people to help address those questions. So any future topics or things you guys want to talk about, make sure you let us know and we'll make sure we build those out. Okay. Well, with that said, I don't see too many more questions coming in. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, really appreciate your time today. Keep an eye out for that follow up with some of those resources. And as always, if there's anything else I can ever do for any of you, please do let me know.